Hello everyone, I'm Jiang, and welcome to Jiang Decoded. Today, we're looking beyond the headlines to examine a question that could shape global politics for years to come. Has the recent confrontation with Iran revealed a deeper strategic challenge for the United States, one that may extend far beyond the Middle East? At first glance, the story appears straightforward. Reports over recent weeks have described military operations, increased naval deployments, heightened tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, and growing concern over energy security. Financial markets have reacted, governments have issued warnings, and analysts have debated what might happen next. But when we step back and examine the broader picture, another question begins to emerge. What if the most important consequence of this crisis isn't happening on the battlefield at all? What if the larger story is about strategy, endurance, and the changing balance of global power? To understand that possibility, we first need to understand why the Strait of Hormuz occupies such an important place in international politics. This narrow stretch of water connects the Persian Gulf to global shipping lanes and remains one of the world's most strategically significant maritime corridors. A substantial share of internationally traded crude oil and liquefied natural gas moves through this passage every day. Because of that reality, even the perception of instability can influence global energy markets. Insurance costs may rise, shipping companies reassess risk, commodity prices fluctuate, governments begin preparing contingency plans. In today's interconnected economy, a regional security crisis can quickly produce global economic consequences. That is why policymakers in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, Tokyo, and many other capitals closely monitor developments in the region. However, military power alone does not determine strategic success. History repeatedly demonstrates that geography, logistics, political unity, economic resilience, and long-term planning often shape the outcome of prolonged geopolitical competition just as much as advanced weapon systems. This brings us to an important concept frequently discussed by military historians. Strong defensive strategies are rarely designed to achieve immediate victory. Instead, many are intended to increase the costs, complexity, and uncertainty facing a stronger opponent. Rather than preventing every military action, they seek to reduce its long-term effectiveness. Over the past 2 decades, Iran has invested heavily in developing a defense posture centered on dispersal, redundancy, and regional resilience. According to military analysts, this approach emphasizes multiple command structures, decentralized capabilities, and the ability to continue operating even if key facilities are damaged or isolated. Whether one agrees with that strategy or not, it reflects an effort to prepare for sustained pressure rather than short-term confrontation. This distinction is important. Many people imagine modern conflict as a contest decided within days. In reality, strategic competition often becomes a contest of endurance. The question shifts from who has greater military strength to who can sustain political, economic, and military pressure for the longest period. History offers many examples. During the Cold War, both superpowers invested not only in military capabilities, but also in industrial production, technological innovation, diplomatic partnerships, and economic resilience. Military competition extended far beyond the battlefield. Today's geopolitical environment is no different. Every military operation carries economic consequences. Every sanction influences global trade. Every diplomatic decision shapes international relationships. And every prolonged crisis forces governments to reconsider their long-term priorities. For the United States, balancing these competing demands has become increasingly complex. American policymakers must simultaneously consider regional security, alliance commitments, global energy stability, domestic economic conditions, and broader strategic competition with other major powers. Those objectives do not always align perfectly. Resources devoted to one challenge may reduce flexibility elsewhere. This does not necessarily indicate strategic weakness. Rather, it reflects the reality that every nation operates with finite political attention, financial resources, and military capacity. At the same time, Other global powers are carefully observing these developments, perhaps none more closely than China. Unlike the United States, China has largely avoided direct military involvement in the current crisis. Instead, Beijing has focused on diplomacy, energy security, industrial expansion, and long-term strategic planning. This difference in approach has prompted growing debate among international analysts. Some argue that prolonged instability in one region may indirectly strengthen competitors operating elsewhere, not because they initiated the conflict, but because they can continue investing in economic development, advanced manufacturing, technological modernization, and regional partnerships, while others remain preoccupied with immediate security challenges. Whether that assessment ultimately proves correct remains uncertain. But it raises an important strategic question. Can one country's regional crisis unintentionally accelerate another country's long-term rise? History suggests the answer is sometimes yes. Major geopolitical shifts rarely occur because of a single battle. They often emerge gradually as economic influence expands, industrial capacity grows, diplomatic relationships evolve, and technological advantages accumulate over many years. That is why many experts believe today's events should not be viewed only through the lens of military operations. They should also be understood as part of a much larger competition over global influence, economic resilience, and strategic positioning. Because while headlines often focus on missiles, ships, and military deployments, the real contest may be unfolding in factories, financial markets, supply chains, research laboratories, and diplomatic negotiations around the world. And that broader competition may ultimately determine who gains the greatest strategic advantage in the years ahead. To understand the broader geopolitical picture, we also need to examine how prolonged regional crises can reshape global competition, even for countries that are not directly involved in the fighting. This is where China enters the discussion. Unlike the United States, China has largely remained on the diplomatic and economic sidelines of the current crisis. While Beijing has called for stability and emphasized dialogue through official statements, it has also continued focusing on long-term priorities such as industrial expansion, technological development, and energy security. For many analysts, this raises an important strategic question. Can a country strengthen its global position simply by avoiding direct involvement, while others become increasingly focused on managing a regional conflict? History suggests that this is possible. Throughout modern history, major powers have often expanded their influence during periods when competitors were forced to dedicate significant attention and resources to military crises elsewhere. That does not necessarily require military intervention. Sometimes patience itself becomes a strategic advantage. China's approach over the past decade reflects this philosophy. Rather than emphasizing global military deployments, Beijing has invested heavily in manufacturing, infrastructure, advanced technology, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, semiconductor development, and modern transportation networks. These investments are designed not for immediate headlines, but for long-term competitiveness. At the same time, China has also devoted considerable effort to strengthening its energy security. The world's second-largest economy depends heavily on imported energy, making stable supply chains an important national priority. For years, Chinese policymakers have worked to diversify suppliers, expand strategic petroleum reserves, invest in overseas energy partnerships, and develop alternative transportation corridors. These measures cannot eliminate every risk. However, they may reduce vulnerability during periods of international uncertainty. Energy security illustrates an important lesson in geopolitics. Military power protects national interests. Economic resilience helps sustain them. A country capable of maintaining stable production, secure supply chains, and reliable energy access during periods of instability often gains important strategic flexibility. That flexibility can influence everything from foreign policy to investment decisions. Another important area receiving increased attention is technological competition. While headlines frequently focus on naval deployments and military operations, the 21st century's most significant strategic competition may occur in industries such as artificial intelligence, advanced computing, aerospace engineering, quantum research, robotics, and semiconductor manufacturing. Success in these fields influences both economic growth and national security. Every year spent expanding research capacity, educating skilled workers, and strengthening industrial production contributes to long-term national competitiveness. This is one reason many experts argue that great power competition should not be viewed only through the lens of military strength. Economic productivity, innovation, education, infrastructure, and technological leadership increasingly shape global influence. Meanwhile, prolonged geopolitical crises often create difficult choices for governments directly involved. Military operations require personnel, equipment, logistics, intelligence, diplomatic coordination, and financial resources. They also demand political attention. Every major foreign policy challenge inevitably competes with domestic priorities. Governments must simultaneously manage economic growth, inflation, infrastructure, healthcare, education, national security, and public expectations. Balancing these priorities becomes increasingly difficult as international tensions continue over longer periods. This is especially true for democratic societies, where public opinion often influences political decision-making. Citizens naturally ask important questions. How long might a crisis continue? What are the economic costs? What objectives are being pursued? How will success be measured? These are reasonable questions during any major international crisis. Responsible policymakers must continually evaluate whether strategies remain aligned with national interests while adapting to changing circumstances. Another important dimension is diplomacy. Even during periods of heightened tension, communication between governments rarely disappears completely. Back-channel discussions, regional mediation efforts, international organizations, and strategic dialogue often continue behind the scenes. History demonstrates that diplomacy and military activity frequently occur simultaneously rather than sequentially. Periods of confrontation sometimes create opportunities for renewed negotiations, particularly when all parties recognize the growing costs of prolonged instability. That possibility should never be overlooked. The future remains uncertain. Several outcomes remain possible. Diplomatic engagement could gradually reduce tensions. Regional competition could continue without major escalation. Or new developments could reshape the strategic environment in unexpected ways. No responsible analyst can predict which outcome will occur with certainty. What can be observed, however, is that prolonged crises often produce consequences extending far beyond their original causes. Some countries face immediate security challenges. Others quietly strengthen their economic position. Some invest in military modernization. Others expand diplomatic influence. The global balance of power rarely changes overnight. Instead, it evolves gradually through thousands of individual decisions made across governments, businesses, research institutions, and financial markets. This is why understanding today's geopolitical landscape requires looking beyond daily headlines. The most significant transformations often occur slowly, long before they become obvious. And that brings us to the final part of our analysis. Because the most important question is no longer simply what is happening today. As we've explored throughout this analysis, the most important question may not be who wins today's confrontation. The more important question is who is better positioned for the next decade. History teaches us that great powers rarely decline because of a single battle. Likewise, rising powers rarely emerge because of a single victory. Instead, global influence changes gradually through economics, technology, industrial capacity, diplomacy, and strategic decision-making. That broader perspective is essential for understanding today's geopolitical landscape. The United States remains one of the world's most powerful nations. Its military capabilities, global alliances, technological innovation, financial markets, and economic influence continue to shape international affairs in ways no other country can fully replicate. At the same time, maintaining that position requires balancing multiple challenges simultaneously: national security, economic competitiveness, energy stability, technological leadership, alliance management, domestic priorities. Each demands attention, resources, and long-term planning. The difficulty is not simply responding to one crisis. It is responding to several at the same time without allowing any single issue to dominate national strategy. This is where many strategic analysts believe today's events deserve closer examination. When governments focus heavily on immediate security concerns, competitors may gain opportunities in less visible areas. Factories continue producing, research laboratories continue innovating, universities continue educating engineers and scientists, infrastructure projects continue expanding, trade relationships continue evolving. These developments rarely dominate headlines, yet over time, they can reshape the global balance of power just as profoundly as military operations. China appears to understand this dynamic well. Over the past several years, Beijing has consistently emphasized long-term planning through industrial modernization, advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence, semiconductor research, renewable energy, and transportation infrastructure. Whether every initiative succeeds remains uncertain. However, the overall strategy reflects a focus extending far beyond short-term geopolitical crises. Another factor that deserves attention is international perception. During periods of prolonged uncertainty, governments around the world reassess partnerships, supply chains, investment destinations, and strategic relationships. Businesses make similar calculations. Investors seek stability. Manufacturers diversify production. Energy companies evaluate new transportation routes. Financial institutions adjust risk assessments. These decisions, repeated thousands of times across the global economy, gradually reshape international influence. In many ways, geopolitical competition has become multidimensional. Military strength remains essential, but so do technological leadership, economic resilience, industrial production, education, scientific research, and diplomatic credibility. No single advantage guarantees long-term success. Instead, national strength increasingly depends upon how effectively these different elements reinforce one another. That is why many experts caution against evaluating international competition solely through military developments. A successful military operation does not automatically produce strategic success. Likewise, avoiding direct confrontation does not necessarily indicate weakness. Sometimes, patience itself becomes part of a long-term strategy. Looking ahead, several scenarios remain possible. Diplomatic negotiations could gradually reduce regional tensions. Economic cooperation may expand despite political disagreements. Strategic competition between major powers could intensify without developing into direct military conflict. Or entirely new challenges, technological breakthroughs, economic shocks, or political changes could reshape today's assumptions. The future remains open. What seems certain today may appear very different only a few years from now. This uncertainty is precisely why thoughtful analysis matters. Rather than asking only who appears stronger in today's headlines, it is often more valuable to ask which decisions are likely to produce sustainable advantages over the next 10 or 20 years. That question applies equally to governments, businesses, investors, and citizens, because the choices made today often shape tomorrow's opportunities. So, has Iran exposed a strategic miscalculation by the United States? The honest answer is that historians, not today's commentators, will ultimately make that judgment. What can be said is that the recent crisis has highlighted several important realities. Regional conflicts now produce global economic consequences almost immediately. Energy security remains central to international politics. Technological competition is becoming just as important as military competition. And strategic patience may prove as valuable as military strength. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: the world's most significant geopolitical contests are rarely decided by a single military campaign. They unfold over decades through economics, innovation, diplomacy, industrial development, and national resilience. That is the larger story unfolding beneath today's headlines. And it is a story that will continue shaping global affairs long after the immediate crisis has passed. If you found this analysis valuable, consider subscribing to Jiang Decoded. Here, we go beyond the headlines to examine the forces shaping geopolitics, economics, history, and the future of global power. Thank you for watching. I'm Jiang, and I'll see you in the next video.